Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Amelia Rose Carter was born on October 12, 2017, in the coastal town of Seabrook Haven, a quiet community tucked along the western shoreline of England. It was the kind of place where neighbors recognized each other in the supermarket and children learned to ride bikes on narrow pavements lined with hedges. Amelia arrived on a windy autumn morning, her cry sharp and determined, as if announcing herself to the world without hesitation. She was the second child of her mother, Rebecca Carter, and her father, Adam Miller. Rebecca already had a 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, who had been born in early 2014. 2 years after Amelia's birth, another baby girl, Isla, would complete the trio in the spring of 2019. From the beginning, Amelia stood out. Her grandmother, Margaret Carter, would later say that Amelia had eyes that seemed too big for her small face, wide and shining like they were constantly taking everything in. Her hair was pale gold and curled softly at the ends, especially when the air was damp from sea spray. Margaret often tied it into 2 tiny pigtails that sat high on her head, fastening them with pastel ribbons or plastic clips shaped like butterflies. She hugged like she meant it, Margaret used to say. Not just a quick squeeze, she'd throw her whole body into you. Though Amelia was shy when meeting new people, hiding half her face behind her mother's leg, she transformed at home. Around family, she was fearless, loud, opinionated. She argued passionately about which bedtime story should be read and insisted on choosing her own clothes, even if it meant wearing mismatched socks and a tutu over leggings. Margaret had a favorite memory that captured Amelia perfectly. One afternoon, Amelia asked if she could paint her fingernails. Rebecca said no. It wasn't a special occasion and there simply wasn't time for the mess. Amelia nodded solemnly and wandered off. 10 minutes later, Margaret walked into the kitchen and stopped short. Bright pink nail varnish was smeared across Amelia's toes, her ankles, and the backs of her hands. It streaked the kitchen floor and dotted the cupboard handles. Amelia stood in the center of the chaos, proud and entirely unapologetic. "I did it myself," she declared. Cleaning it up took over an hour, but Margaret would later say that every time she thought about it, she smiled. Amelia's independence wasn't defiance, it was determination. She believed if something could be done, she could do it. Amelia loved music. If a song came on the radio, she would spin until she grew dizzy, her laughter filling the house. She and Sophie would stay up whispering long after lights out, pretending they were princesses trapped in towers or explorers on secret missions. They reenacted scenes from animated films, taking turns playing heroes and villains, inventing dramatic dialogue far beyond their years. Her favorite snack was cheese-flavored corn puffs that left orange dust on her fingers. She called them magic crunchies. Her favorite film was an old animated classic about a clever rabbit and a world where cartoons lived alongside humans. She didn't understand all the jokes, but she adored the silliness. Her father, Adam, described her as sunlight in motion. Though he and Rebecca were no longer together by the time Amelia turned 1, he remained involved from a distance. He visited when he could and called often. When Amelia ran toward him at the park, curls bouncing, he swore he could feel the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. She loved being outside, Adam would say. She'd stop to watch ants like they were performing for her. Margaret's garden became Amelia's kingdom. She helped pick strawberries in summer, staining her lips red. She insisted on examining every apple before placing it in the basket. She chased butterflies with unwavering focus, often tripping over her own feet, but laughing instead of crying. She was happiest covered in mud, her Wellington boots heavy and her knees grass-stained. Rebecca would sigh at the laundry pile, but Margaret didn't mind. "That's childhood," she'd say. Yet beneath the bright snapshots of Amelia's early years, life at home was complicated. Rebecca and Adam's relationship had ended shortly after Amelia's birth. They had been young, and their connection had not lasted beyond the first rush of excitement. Adam tried to stay present in his daughter's life, but distance and tension made involvement inconsistent. Rebecca carried the weight of raising 3 young children largely on her own. Their home in Seabrook Haven was a modest, semi-detached house on a narrow street. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Inside, it told a different story. Visitors described the space as cluttered. Toys scattered across floors, laundry piled in corners, dishes left soaking in the sink. The air sometimes carried the stale scent of nappies that had not yet been taken outside. It wasn't filth in the sense of deliberate neglect, but it reflected exhaustion, overwhelm. Photographs Rebecca shared online showed smiling children against pastel-painted walls decorated with cartoon decals. Pink curtains framed the living room windows, but in the corners of those images one could see the strain: empty soda cans on the coffee table, sticky remnants of snacks on sideboards, the quiet evidence of a mother stretched thin. After her separation from Adam, Rebecca entered another relationship. This one was different. At first, friends said he seemed attentive, helpful with errands, charming in public. But over time, the relationship darkened. His temper surfaced in subtle ways: sharp words, controlling behavior, tension that lingered in the house like a storm cloud. One evening, neighbors heard shouting. There was a crash. Police were called. Rebecca reported that an argument had escalated. No one was seriously injured, but it was enough. The relationship ended abruptly after that incident. In Seabrook Haven, as in much of England, a domestic disturbance involving children often triggered additional scrutiny. The local health authority was notified. A multi-agency referral was filed to ensure Rebecca and her daughters had access to support services. The Coastal Regional Health Trust became involved. Their records would later show that Rebecca's household had prior interactions with community services, not criminal matters, but welfare checks, conversations about mental health, concerns about living conditions. In January 2020, a health visitor named Eleanor Hughes was assigned to the case. Health visitors in the UK serve a unique role. They are trained nurses or midwives who specialize in community public health, particularly for families with young children. Their responsibilities include monitoring child development, assessing home environments, and connecting families with resources when needed. Eleanor had worked in child health for over a decade. She understood that many families struggled quietly. Her approach was steady and practical rather than judgmental. On a gray morning in early January, Eleanor knocked on Rebecca's door. Inside, the house was warm but crowded. Isla, still a baby, lay in a cot in the corner of the living room. Sophie watched cartoons, volume higher than necessary. Amelia sat cross-legged on the floor, lining up plastic figurines in meticulous rows. Eleanor introduced herself gently, explaining her role. Rebecca appeared nervous but cooperative. As Eleanor moved through the house, she observed carefully. The kitchen sink was stacked with unwashed plates. A bag of rubbish leaned against the back door. Laundry overflowed from a basket in the hallway. But there was food in the fridge: fresh milk, fruit, bread. The girls wore clean clothes. Eleanor made notes discreetly. She asked Rebecca about routines, about sleep schedules, about support systems. Rebecca admitted she was tired, overwhelmed, sometimes unsure how to manage 3 children alone. Amelia watched the conversation with sharp curiosity. At one point, she tugged on Eleanor's sleeve and offered her a toy rabbit. "He's brave," Amelia said solemnly. Eleanor smiled and thanked her. The visit ended with referrals for parenting support groups and mental health services. Rebecca nodded along, promising to attend. As Eleanor stepped back into the cold air outside, she felt cautious optimism. The home showed signs of strain, but not immediate danger. Intervention could stabilize things. Inside, Amelia returned to her imaginary world, unaware of reports being written about her life. She only knew that she had strawberries to pick when summer came again, that Sophie would sneak into her bed later to whisper secrets, that her grandmother would visit with ribbon bows and stories. For now, she was still the brightest thing in the room. By the spring of 2020, the scrutiny surrounding the Harper household had quietly intensified. After the referral from the Regional Health Authority, a community health practitioner named Elaine Porter was assigned to conduct follow-up visits. Elaine had worked in child welfare for nearly 15 years across Northbridge County, a semi-rural region in the north of England, where small towns blended into farmland and tight-knit communities often masked private struggles. Her role was not enforcement, but assessment. She evaluated living conditions, monitored child development, and flagged concerns when necessary. When she first stepped into Sienna Harper's semi-detached rental on Aldergrove, she noticed the same contrast others had described. The sitting room walls were painted in pastel shades, decorated with cartoon decals and family photographs, but the air felt heavy. Laundry baskets overflowed into corners. Unwashed dishes were stacked precariously in the sink. A sour smell lingered beneath the artificial scent of air freshener. Mila, 2.5 years old at the time, was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, lining up plastic animals with serious concentration. Her older sister, Ruby, hovered protectively nearby. The baby, Elsie, dozed in a travel cot near the sofa. Elaine documented what she saw with clinical neutrality. Clutter, yes. Disorganization, certainly. But she also saw stocked cupboards, a fridge with fresh milk and fruit, and 3 children who were clean and appropriately dressed. Mila had a fading bruise on her shin that Sienna attributed to a fall in the garden. At that age, bruises were not uncommon. During their conversation, Sienna appeared tired but cooperative. She acknowledged feeling overwhelmed. The breakup with Mila's father, Luke Bennett, had left her largely on her own. Luke visited occasionally, but he lived nearly an hour away and worked irregular shifts as a delivery driver. Financial stress weighed heavily. Sienna admitted to bouts of anxiety and low mood, but insisted she loved her girls fiercely. Elaine recommended parenting support classes and referred Sienna for counseling. The case remained categorized as child in need, not at risk. It was a subtle but important distinction. The threshold for more aggressive intervention had not been met. Around that same time, Sienna began seeing someone new. His name was Callum Reed. Callum had grown up in a neighboring estate known more for petty crime than stability. In his early 30s, he carried himself with a kind of restless intensity. He had worked various short-term jobs, mostly warehouse labor and construction, but nothing steady. Friends described him as charismatic at first meeting, quick with a joke, capable of being charming. But there were undercurrents, a temper that flared too fast, an inability to tolerate perceived disrespect. He moved into Aldergrove gradually, first overnight visits, then several nights in a row. By late summer, his trainers were lined up by the door permanently. Neighbors later told investigators that arguments became more frequent. Raised voices spilled into the street through open windows. Sometimes it was Sienna crying, sometimes Callum shouting. Once a neighbor heard something crash against a wall, followed by the sharp cry of a child. But in working-class neighborhoods where houses shared thin walls, people often convinced themselves it was none of their business. Elaine's second visit that autumn felt different. The house appeared marginally tidier, though still chaotic. Callum was present this time, leaning against the kitchen counter with folded arms. He answered questions directed at Sienna. His tone was polite, but edged with impatience. Mila clung unusually close to her older sister. When Elaine attempted to engage her in conversation, the little girl avoided eye contact and pressed her face into Ruby's jumper. Elaine made note of the behavioral change: withdrawal, guarded posture. It could indicate many things: developmental shifts, stranger anxiety, household stress. She asked Sienna privately whether anything had changed at home. Sienna hesitated before answering. "It's just been busy," she said. "Callum's helping out." No visible injuries were documented during that visit. Elaine left with lingering unease, but no concrete evidence. Over the next few months, small signals accumulated like scattered pieces of a larger picture no one had fully assembled. Ruby's nursery teacher mentioned that Mila sometimes arrived unusually quiet. On one occasion, she had flinched when a classroom assistant reached to guide her by the shoulder. The teacher attributed it to sensitivity. Toddlers varied widely in temperament. In November, Sienna missed a scheduled home appointment with the health service. She later apologized, explaining that Mila had been unwell with what she believed was a stomach virus. There had been vomiting, she said, lethargy. The illness passed after a day or two. There was no GP visit recorded. By early December, the region was gripped by cold rain and shorter days. Families spent more time indoors. Tensions that might have dissipated in open air instead compressed inside small living rooms. On a Tuesday evening just before Christmas, emergency services received a frantic call from Callum. He reported that Mila had collapsed. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found the toddler unconscious on the living room floor. Sienna knelt beside her, sobbing. Callum stood back, pacing, hands on his head. Mila's breathing was shallow. There were faint marks visible on her face and torso, but in the urgency of resuscitation, those details became secondary to stabilizing her airway. She was transported to Northbridge General Hospital under blue lights. At the hospital, pediatric consultants quickly realized this was not a simple collapse. Imaging revealed significant head trauma. There was swelling of the brain consistent with forceful impact. Additional scans showed injuries at varying stages of healing, including rib fractures and bruising deep within muscle tissue. The attending physician contacted the on-call safeguarding team immediately. Police were notified before midnight. Sienna initially maintained that Mila had fallen down the stairs earlier that evening. She said the child had seemed fine afterward, just sleepy. It was Callum who added that Mila had been clumsy lately, prone to bumping into things. Medical staff, however, knew the pattern did not align with a single accidental fall. The severity of the head injury suggested high-force trauma. The rib fractures indicated previous incidents. Mila was transferred to a specialist children's hospital in the city. She was placed on life support. For 2 days, machines breathed for her. Extended family gathered in sterile waiting rooms. Luke Bennett arrived from his flat in Eastmere, stunned and hollow-eyed. He had not been aware of any serious concerns. He insisted he had never seen Callum act aggressively toward Mila, though he admitted his visits had become less frequent. Sienna remained at the hospital, alternating between silence and inconsolable sobbing. Callum gave a brief statement to police, reiterating the fall narrative. Officers noted inconsistencies in the timeline. On the 3rd day, doctors informed the family that Mila's brain activity had deteriorated beyond recovery. The decision was made, with devastating finality, to withdraw life support. She was 3 years old. The case shifted immediately from safeguarding inquiry to criminal investigation. Detectives from the major incident team began reconstructing the months preceding Mila's death. They seized mobile phones, they canvassed neighbors, they requested medical and social service records. Forensic examination of the home on Aldergrove revealed areas of concern. A section of plasterboard in the hallway showed signs of recent repair. There were faint stains on the living room rug. Nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest prior incidents that had not been reported. The post-mortem examination was comprehensive. The pathologist concluded that Mila's fatal injury resulted from blunt force trauma to the head. The force required was comparable to a high-speed car collision or a forceful blow against a hard surface. The rib fractures were estimated to have occurred weeks earlier. Police arrested Callum Reed on suspicion of murder and child cruelty. Sienna was arrested on suspicion of causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. The community reacted with disbelief. Outside the modest brick house on Aldergrove, neighbors left flowers and stuffed animals. Photos of Mila circulated online, bright-eyed, smiling, often with smudges of mud on her cheeks from garden play. In custody, Callum's demeanor shifted. Initially defensive, he later claimed that Sienna had been rough with Mila during moments of stress. He suggested she had pushed the child, shaken her. He framed himself as a bystander. Sienna, during interview, insisted she had never intentionally harmed her daughter. She admitted arguments with Callum had escalated in recent months. She described episodes where he became angry over minor frustrations, spilled drinks, noise, perceived defiance. She claimed he sometimes disciplined Mila more harshly than she would have liked. When asked why she had not intervened or reported concerns, she broke down. She said she feared losing him. She feared managing 3 children alone. She convinced herself the incidents were isolated. Investigators began piecing together a pattern. Text messages between the couple revealed tension. In one exchange, Callum complained that Mila was doing his head in. In another, Sienna apologized for not keeping her quiet. Neighbors recalled a loud thud one evening in October, followed by crying that abruptly stopped. The safeguarding records showed missed appointments and incomplete follow-ups, but no formal escalation to child protection proceedings. By late winter, prosecutors determined there was sufficient evidence to charge Callum with murder and Sienna with causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. The arrest announcement sent shockwaves through Northbridge County. How had no one intervened sooner? Had the signs been too subtle, or had they been overlooked? For those who had briefly stepped inside the Harper home, hindsight cast ordinary observations in a harsher light. The clutter, the tension, the child's withdrawal. But at the time, each detail existed in isolation. Mila's funeral took place under gray skies. Her small white coffin was adorned with hand-drawn butterflies from Ruby's nursery classmates. Luke carried one side, his face set in rigid grief. Sienna did not attend. She remained on remand. In the months that followed, the case moved toward trial. The trial began nearly a year after Mila Harper's death. By then, the initial shock in Northbridge County had settled into something colder and more analytical. Court proceedings tend to strip tragedy of its intimacy. What had once been a little girl with muddy boots and a lopsided grin was now a series of exhibits labeled and cataloged. Exhibit 13, cranial imaging. Exhibit 27, forensic pathology report. Exhibit 42, mobile phone extraction. Callum Reed and Sienna Harper were tried together at Crown Court. Callum faced a charge of murder and an alternative count of manslaughter. Sienna faced charges of causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. Both pleaded not guilty. The prosecution opened with a clear theory. Mila had been subjected to escalating physical abuse in the months preceding her death, and the fatal injury had been inflicted during a violent outburst by Callum. Sienna, they argued, either knew or should have known that her daughter was at risk and failed to protect her. The jury listened as the pediatric neurologist described the severity of the head trauma. He explained the force required was not consistent with a simple fall downstairs. The pattern of injury suggested either a forceful blow or violent impact against a hard surface. The brain swelling had been catastrophic. The pathologist testified next. Mila had sustained multiple rib fractures at different stages of healing. Some were estimated to be 2 to 3 weeks old at the time of death. There were also bruises to her abdomen and back, areas not typically injured in routine childhood tumbles. In the quiet courtroom, those details landed heavily. The defense for Callum argued that there was no direct eyewitness to the fatal incident. They emphasized that Sienna had been alone with Mila for portions of the day. They suggested that the child could have fallen earlier and deteriorated later, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as a lucid interval. They challenged the certainty of medical conclusions. But under cross-examination, the medical experts remained firm. The injuries were not accidental. The timing of the brain trauma was close to the collapse reported in the emergency call. The prosecution then presented text messages between Callum and Sienna. In one message sent weeks before Mila's death, Callum wrote, "She doesn't listen. I'm sick of it." In another, after Sienna had taken Ruby and the baby to her mother's house for an afternoon, Callum asked, "You taking Mila too? I can't deal with her today." The tone was not affectionate. It was resentful. Several neighbors testified about hearing shouting from Alder Grove. One recalled a loud bang followed by a child's crying that stopped abruptly. Another described seeing Mila outside weeks before her death with a visible bruise on her cheek. When asked about it at the time, Sienna had reportedly said Mila had walked into a door. The jury also heard from Elaine Porter, the community health practitioner. She outlined her visits, her observations, and the classification of the case as child in need. She acknowledged noticing changes in Mila's behavior, but admitted there had been no clear evidence meeting the threshold for child protection proceedings. Her testimony was professional, but visibly affected. No safeguarding worker wants to sit in court wondering whether an earlier escalation might have changed the outcome. Sienna took the stand in her own defense. She appeared smaller than she had in photographs shown to the jury. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke about Mila's personality. She described her as stubborn, funny, affectionate. She insisted she had never deliberately harmed her daughter. When questioned about Callum's temper, she admitted there had been arguments. She admitted he sometimes shouted at Mila. She described one incident where he grabbed Mila roughly by the arm after she spilled juice. She said she had told him to calm down. "Why didn't you remove your children from that situation?" the prosecutor asked. Sienna paused for a long time. "I thought I could manage it," she said finally. "I didn't think he'd go that far." That sentence lingered in the courtroom. Callum chose to testify as well. He denied ever striking Mila. He described himself as a supportive partner who had tried to help with the children. He suggested Sienna had been overwhelmed and sometimes rough when frustrated. Under cross-examination, the prosecution highlighted inconsistencies in his police interviews. His timeline of events shifted. Initially, he had claimed Mila fell down the stairs. Later, he said he had not seen the fall but heard a thud. Phone data placed him alone with Mila for a significant period that evening while Sienna bathed the baby upstairs. The prosecutor's final question was blunt. "You were the only adult in the room when Mila sustained a fatal head injury, weren't you?" Callum responded, "I didn't hurt her." After 6 weeks of evidence, the jury retired. They deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. Callum Reed was found guilty of murder. Sienna Harper was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and of child cruelty. The judge addressed Callum first at sentencing. He described the crime as a gross breach of trust against a defenseless child. He noted the pattern of prior injuries and the attempt to disguise the fatal assault as an accident. Callum was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years before eligibility for parole. Turning to Sienna, his tone shifted. He acknowledged that she had not been found to have inflicted the fatal injury, but he emphasized her responsibility as Mila's mother. She had been aware of escalating aggression. She had seen bruises. She had heard the shouting. She had chosen not to remove her daughter from danger. Your failure to act, he said, had devastating consequences. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Mila's father, Luke Bennett, spoke briefly to reporters. He said his daughter had been full of light and that no sentence could restore what had been lost. He urged other parents to trust their instincts and act at the first sign of harm. In the months following the verdict, an independent safeguarding review was commissioned. Such reviews are standard when a child dies in circumstances involving prior agency contact. The panel examined health visitor notes, referral thresholds, missed appointments, and communication between services. The final report did not identify a single catastrophic failure. Instead, it described incremental missed opportunities, concerns documented but not escalated, patterns seen but not fully contextualized, professionals operating within guidelines that require clear evidence before intrusive action can be taken. It concluded that while procedures were largely followed, greater professional curiosity and more assertive follow-up might have prompted earlier intervention. Those conclusions offered little comfort to a community still grappling with the loss. Ruby and Elsie were placed with extended family members. Their identities were protected. Counseling was arranged. Children adapt in ways adults sometimes cannot fully comprehend, but the imprint of early trauma often lingers quietly. For Northbridge County, Mila's case became a reference point in training sessions and policy discussions. It was cited when emphasizing the importance of listening to small behavioral changes. It was referenced in debates about thresholds for intervention and the balance between parental rights and child protection. But beyond systems and reforms, there remained the simpler truth. A little girl who loved dancing in the kitchen and lining up plastic animals on the carpet died from injuries no child should ever experience. In the end, the legal process provided accountability, not closure. There is a difference. Accountability assigns responsibility. Closure implies something finished, something resolved. For families who lose children to violence, that resolution rarely arrives. Mila's story did not end in the courtroom. It continues in quieter ways, in the cautious vigilance of teachers who notice when a child flinches, in the careful documentation of a health visitor who senses something unspoken, in the conversations between neighbors who decide that a cry through the wall is worth reporting. Her life, brief as it was, altered the trajectory of many others. And in the small garden behind a house on Aldergrove, long after the police tape was removed and the house was eventually rented to another family, daffodils bloomed each spring. They returned every year, indifferent to human failure, bright against the gray. For those who remember Mila Harper, they are a quiet reminder of a child who once ran through muddy grass chasing butterflies, unaware of the dangers that should never have been hers to face. Megan Rowlands liked to say that her middle daughter, Ivy, had arrived in the world with her fists clenched and her lungs wide open. Ivy was born on October 12, 2017, in the coastal town of Aberwyn, a tight-knit community tucked along the western edge of Wales. She was Megan's second child with her former partner, Ryan Edwards. Their first daughter, Poppy, had been born 3 years earlier, and their youngest, Elsie, would follow in the spring of 2019. To her grandmother, Diane Rowlands, Ivy was unforgettable. She had pale gold curls that refused to be tamed and large gray-blue eyes that seemed permanently curious. Diane called her my little whirlwind. Ivy was shy around strangers at first, often hiding behind her mother's legs, but once she warmed up, she was fearless. She climbed anything that resembled a ladder, sang loudly and off-key to whatever song was playing, and insisted on doing things herself, even if it meant making a mess in the process. One of Diane's favorite memories was the day Ivy discovered nail varnish. Megan had told her she was too young for painted nails. 10 minutes later, Diane walked into the living room to find bright pink polish smeared across Ivy's fingers, toes, and somehow even along her ankles. There were splatters on the carpet and streaks on the coffee table. Ivy looked up with a triumphant grin. "I did it myself, Nan," she declared. Diane would later say that even though it took nearly an hour to scrub the varnish off everything, she couldn't help but laugh every time she thought about it. Ivy loved music and dancing. She and Poppy would stay up past their bedtime pretending to be princesses, twirling in mismatched costumes and using hairbrushes as microphones. Ivy adored animated films and had recently become obsessed with a cartoon rabbit who solved mysteries. She would carry her stuffed rabbit everywhere, its once white fur permanently smudged from being dragged across garden paths and kitchen floors. Ryan Edwards and Megan had separated not long after Ivy's birth. Ryan remained involved at a distance, seeing the girls regularly and describing Ivy as bright as the summer sun. But he was no longer part of Megan's daily life. Megan and the children lived in a modest, semi-detached house on Bringlass Road in Aberwyn. The house was small but cheerful, with floral wallpaper in the girls' bedroom and pink curtains Megan had picked out during a rare afternoon alone. Visitors sometimes noticed the clutter. Laundry baskets overflowed, toys were scattered across the living room, empty cups and snack wrappers sat forgotten on side tables. Megan was juggling 3 young children, and housekeeping often slipped down the list of priorities. Still, there was warmth in the home. The girls' drawings covered the fridge, their laughter carried through open windows on summer evenings. After her separation from Ryan, Megan entered another relationship that quickly turned volatile. There was an incident that neighbors described as loud and frightening. Police were called. Megan later identified herself as a survivor of domestic abuse. In response, the local health board initiated support measures. In Wales, community health visitors play a crucial role in monitoring families with young children, offering guidance and referring them to services when needed. In January 2020, a health visitor named Sarah Linton began working with Megan. Sarah's role was to assess the home environment, provide parenting support, and identify any safeguarding concerns. During her first visit, she found Megan exhausted but cooperative. Megan spoke openly about her past relationship and admitted she was struggling with flashbacks and anxiety. "I'm scared of letting anyone close again," she told Sarah, "but I don't want to be alone forever." Sarah provided information about domestic abuse resources and explained how exposure to violence could affect children. She encouraged Megan to be cautious about new partners, especially around the girls. Megan nodded, listening intently. When Sarah returned in February for a follow-up visit, she noted that the house appeared cluttered and smelled damp. The kitchen sink was stacked with dishes, laundry was piled in corners. Ivy, then 2 years old, was running barefoot across the living room floor, her feet visibly dirty. She had a faint mark on her shin that Megan dismissed as a bruise from climbing. "Ivy never sits still," Megan said with a weary smile. "She's into everything." In text messages later recovered during the investigation, Megan described Ivy as a little terror and non-stop from morning till night. In one message to a friend, she wrote, "She doesn't listen, she's always climbing, always screaming, I don't get a minute." There was frustration in her words, but also the tone of a mother overwhelmed rather than malicious. Megan enrolled Ivy in a local early years program called Bright Steps, hoping structured play might help with her behavior. She confided to Sarah that she suspected Ivy might have ADHD. "There's something different about her. She's so demanding." Sarah offered additional support, including speech therapy and parenting sessions with a community nurse. Megan declined, insisting she could manage. Around the same time, Megan visited her GP, Dr. Eleanor Hughes. She described sleepless nights, anxiety, and intrusive memories from her past abusive relationship. She admitted that Ivy often stayed awake until the early hours, resisting bedtime and throwing food in meals. Dr. Hughes prescribed antidepressants and recommended counseling. The medications seemed to help. Megan later said she felt more stable in the weeks that followed. Then, in late February, Megan received a friend request on social media from a man named Aaron Blake. He was a stranger, though they shared mutual acquaintances. His profile described him as on a fresh start and done with the old life. He messaged Megan within hours of her accepting the request. Aaron was candid about his past. He said he had struggled with substance misuse, including crack cocaine and synthetic cannabinoids, but claimed he was in recovery. He admitted he still drank occasionally and used cannabis. He had a young son from a previous relationship but was not in contact with him. Megan later said she felt vulnerable at the time. Despite her fear of men following her earlier abusive relationship, she saw something protective in Aaron. He was attentive in their messages, calling her strong and beautiful and praising her devotion to her children. Within days, their online conversations turned into in-person meetings. Soon after, Aaron began staying overnight. It happened quickly. By early March, he had effectively moved into the house on Bringlass Road. Sarah Linton was unaware of the new arrangement. Due to the emerging COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown restrictions, home visits were suspended. Contact continued by phone, but Megan did not disclose that a new adult male was living in the home. At first, Aaron appeared engaged with the children. He cooked dinner, he played games with Poppy, he bought Ivy small gifts, plastic bracelets, and chocolate eggs. Megan told friends he was amazing with the girls. But there were subtle shifts. Aaron's moods fluctuated. Some days he was affectionate and playful. On others, he was irritable and withdrawn. Text messages later revealed his frustration. Too many kids, too much noise, it's doing my head in. In April, Megan woke to a message from Aaron sent at 2:25 a.m. Ivy fell on the stairs, tripped over her toys, bit her lip. Ivy had a swollen mouth the next morning. Megan accepted the explanation. Toddlers fall, she reasoned. Ivy was clumsy and constantly climbing. A week later, Megan noticed a scrape on Ivy's chin. Aaron said she had slipped in the kitchen. Megan did not question it further. As lockdown deepened and isolation increased, tensions in the house grew. Megan and Aaron argued more frequently. He complained about the noise, about the mess, about Ivy's refusal to sleep. Megan confided to a friend that Ivy had begun screaming whenever Aaron put her to bed. On May 10th, Elsie, the baby, developed a black eye while in Aaron's care. Megan told her best friend and neighbor, Laura Jenkins, that it had been an accident. Laura was uneasy. She did not like Aaron. She had noticed the way his temper flared unexpectedly. By mid-May, Megan knew Aaron was using drugs again. She admitted they had taken amphetamines together on occasion when the children were staying with her mother. She insisted she never used substances while the girls were home. One night, after taking Xanax, Aaron smashed a lamp and punched a hole in a cupboard door during an argument. Megan gathered the children and fled to Laura's house. They stayed overnight. The next day, Aaron apologized profusely. He sent messages calling himself a monster and begging forgiveness. Against Laura's advice, Megan returned home with the girls. The pattern was set: volatility, apology, reconciliation. Over the following weeks, Ivy accumulated more bruises, a mark on her thigh, scratches on her neck. Each time there was an explanation. The dog jumped up, she fell off the sofa, she tripped over toys. Megan believed him, or perhaps she chose to. By early July, the situation had become volatile enough that Megan considered requesting a background check through Clare's Law, a domestic violence disclosure scheme. She asked Aaron for his date of birth so she could apply. He refused. "They won't find anything on me," he said. "You don't trust me." Despite her doubts, she allowed him to stay. On the evening of July 16th, 2020, Megan went to bed around 7:30 p.m., leaving Aaron downstairs with Ivy. The house was quiet. The older girls were asleep. Shortly after midnight, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. Ivy screamed. Megan stirred but did not immediately rise. Aaron called out from the children's room, "She's fine, just bumped her head." Megan lay back down. Within hours, everything would change. When Megan woke again, it was still dark. At first, she did not know what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard it clearly. A strange, uneven sound coming downstairs. Not quite crying, not quite snoring, something wet and labored. She sat up. The clock on her phone read 6:47 a.m. Her first thought was Ivy. The child had always been a restless sleeper. Maybe she had wandered downstairs again. Maybe Aaron had fallen asleep on the sofa and left her unsupervised. Megan padded down the hallway and descended the stairs. Ivy was lying on the living room couch. For a split second, Megan did not recognize her. Her daughter's face was swollen beyond proportion. Both eyes were puffy and purple. Her lips were enlarged, one side split and crusted with dried blood. Her skin looked mottled. There were dark bruises visible on her arms and legs, some already blooming in deep blue patches. Aaron stood nearby, pacing. "She fell," he said quickly, "down the stairs. I tried to tell you earlier she banged her head." Megan moved closer. Ivy's body felt heavy and limp when she touched her. Her breathing was shallow, accompanied by that strange rasping sound. "She won't wake up," Megan whispered. Aaron said he had already called his mother for advice. He claimed he had tried to rouse Ivy, that she had been snoring weird and wouldn't open her eyes. "What happened?" Megan asked again, more urgently now. "He must have gone to the top of the stairs when I was in the kitchen. I heard bangs. By the time I got there, she was at the bottom." He added that the dog might have knocked her, that she was always climbing, always falling. Megan's thoughts felt foggy, as if she were still half asleep. She remembered hearing a bang in the night. She remembered Aaron saying he had it under control. She picked up her phone and dialed 999 at 7:30 a.m. "My daughter's fallen down the stairs. She's not waking up. Her head's all swollen." Aaron stood close by, interjecting that the dog had barged into Ivy and caused the fall. Megan repeated that explanation over the phone. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics later described the scene as deeply concerning. The house was cluttered. There were clothes and food wrappers scattered across the floor. The air felt stale. Ivy was wet. Her hair was damp. She was dressed in clean pajamas, but she was not wearing a nappy, something Megan later admitted was unusual for bedtime. Her face was grotesquely swollen. Both eyes were nearly closed from bruising. There were marks visible across her neck, back, and thighs. The paramedics noted that the injuries appeared far more extensive than would be expected from a simple fall down carpeted stairs. But in that moment, the priority was survival. Ivy was still breathing, though barely responsive. She was rushed to Aberwyn General Hospital. Megan and Aaron followed in a separate car. Megan's mother, Diane, and Ivy's father, Ryan, were notified and began making their way to the hospital as well. In the emergency department, doctors worked rapidly to stabilize Ivy. She was intubated and placed on a ventilator. Scans were ordered immediately. When physicians began asking questions about how the injuries occurred, Aaron became defensive. "She's accident prone. She's always falling. She's wild. They're testing her for ADHD." He repeated that she had fallen down the stairs, that the dog might have contributed, that he had tried to help. Megan sat quietly beside the bed, holding Ivy's hand. When the CT scan results came back, the tone in the room shifted. There was a large subdural hemorrhage, bleeding across multiple areas of the brain, swelling that was placing dangerous pressure on delicate tissue. There were signs of both impact and rotational injury. This was not consistent with a short fall. A pediatric consultant asked Megan directly, "Has Ivy been shaken?" Megan shook her head, stunned. "No, never." Because of the severity of the injuries, Ivy was transferred to the Regional Pediatric Intensive Care Unit in Cardiff. Megan and Diane followed the ambulance. Aaron, unexpectedly, did not. He told Megan he would go home to shower and gather clothes. Instead, later that morning, police officers who conducted a welfare check found him vacuuming the living room. The rest of the house remained cluttered and dirty, but the area around the sofa was conspicuously clean. Upstairs, officers discovered a set of children's pajamas in the corner of the room. They were wet and stained with vomit and blood. The bathtub downstairs appeared freshly scrubbed. When asked for his phone, he initially claimed he did not have one. Officers heard it ringing under a blanket. They seized it. Meanwhile, in Cardiff, Ivy lay unconscious in the intensive care unit. Machines beeped steadily. Her tiny chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance. Doctors observed injuries that were deeply alarming. Bruising covered her body. Later counts would identify more than 100 separate bruises and abrasions. Some were small fingertip marks consistent with gripping. Others were larger pattern contusions suggestive of an implement. There were circular bruises on her thigh, linear marks across her back. Her neck bore signs consistent with compression. The bleeding in her brain was severe. Both eyes showed extensive retinal hemorrhages, bleeding in all quadrants, including near the optic nerve. There were retinal folds and splitting, injuries most often associated with violent shaking. Dr. Helen Morris, a consultant pediatrician with years of trauma experience, later testified that she had rarely seen a child so extensively injured. Quote, "This is not a fall downstairs," she said firmly. Back in Aberwyn, forensic specialists examined Aaron's phone. What they found was damning. At 6:31 a.m., nearly an hour before emergency services were called, Aaron had searched online, quote, "child unconscious after bang to head, snoring." He had accessed a medical website that clearly advised immediate ambulance contact if a child exhibited loss of consciousness, excessive bruising, or abnormal breathing. He did not call for help. At 6:34 a.m., he took photographs of Ivy. In the images, she was upright but clearly dazed, her face swollen and eyes partially closed. 2 minutes later, he took more photographs. In these, Ivy appeared unresponsive, slumped sideways. At 6:58 a.m., he recorded a 22-second video. In the footage, he lifted Ivy under her arms and attempted to stand her on the floor. She collapsed instantly. Her head hit the ground with an audible thud. He picked her up again and placed her on the sofa. "She's gone," he muttered. He sent the video to his mother. He still did not call an ambulance. Instead, he bathed Ivy, changed her clothes, disposed of her bloodied pajamas. At 7:28 a.m., he messaged his mother asking her to call emergency services. She did. When confronted with the video by police, Megan watched in horror. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. "If he can do that," she said through tears, "what else has he done?" She had believed him, defended him, left him alone with her children repeatedly. Now she saw her daughter limp in his hands. Later that afternoon, Aaron texted Megan from his phone while officers were still investigating. "We need to make sure our stories match," he wrote. "She fell downstairs. The dog jumped on her. It happens all the time." The implication was clear. Police arrested both Megan and Aaron on suspicion of child neglect and assault. They were interviewed separately and released pending further investigation. Over the next 4 days, Ivy remained on life support. Ryan sat at her bedside speaking softly to her. Diane prayed. Megan oscillated between numbness and panic. On July 21, 2020, doctors determined that Ivy's brain injury was unsurvivable. She was 2 years and 9 months old. Her life support was withdrawn, with her father holding one hand and her grandmother holding the other. Ryan would later say the image of his daughter in that hospital bed would never leave him. Police returned to Bryn Glass Road to arrest Aaron again, this time on suspicion of murder. Megan was arrested on suspicion of causing or allowing the death of a child. The town of Aberwin fell into stunned silence. Pink ribbons appeared tied to lampposts. Stuffed animals were placed outside the house. Neighbors who had once heard shouting through thin walls now replayed those memories with unbearable clarity. A small white and pink coffin would soon travel slowly through town. But before that, there would be a long investigation, a detailed forensic reconstruction, and eventually a trial that would force every failure, every warning sign, and every choice into the open. The investigation that followed Ivy Rollins' death was meticulous and unrelenting. Forensic pathologists conducted a full post-mortem examination. The findings were devastating in scope. Ivy had sustained catastrophic traumatic brain injury. There was a large subdural hemorrhage, significant brain swelling, and widespread retinal hemorrhages involving multiple layers of the eye. The pattern of bleeding and retinal folds strongly indicated violent shaking combined with impact. But the brain injury was only part of the story. Ivy's small body bore evidence of sustained physical abuse. More than 100 separate external injuries were documented. Bruises of varying ages covered her arms, legs, torso, and face. Some were fresh, others were in stages of healing. There were fingertip marks consistent with forceful gripping. Linear marks suggested impact with an object. There were injuries to her neck consistent with compression.
Several rib fractures were identified, some recent, some older and healing. There was also evidence of prior injury to her soft tissues that could not be explained by ordinary childhood activity. The pathologist concluded that the fatal injuries had occurred within hours of her collapse. They were not consistent with a short fall down carpeted stairs. The degree of force required was significant. In professional terms, the cause of death was traumatic head injury inflicted by another. Meanwhile, digital forensic analysis of Aaron Blake's phone added a chilling layer to the timeline. Investigators reconstructed his online activity minute by minute. At 6:31 a.m., he had searched for symptoms associated with head trauma in children, including abnormal breathing. The website he accessed advised urgent medical attention. He did not call an ambulance. The photographs and video he captured were entered into evidence. Experts testified that Ivy was already severely neurologically compromised at the time those images were recorded. In the video, when Aaron lifted her and allowed her to collapse to the floor, she displayed no protective reflex. Her head struck the ground without resistance. That absence of response was consistent with profound brain dysfunction. The delay in seeking medical help was estimated at approximately 45 minutes to an hour from the time Ivy became critically unwell. Pediatric specialists stated that while the injuries were likely unsurvivable regardless, the delay demonstrated awareness that something was gravely wrong. Police also uncovered text messages in which Aaron attempted to coordinate explanations. His instruction that our stories match and that Ivy had fallen down the stairs was presented as evidence of consciousness of guilt. The Crown Prosecution Service authorized charges of murder against Aaron Blake and charges against Megan Rollins for causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. The trial began the following year at Swansea Crown Court. By that time, Aberwin had long since processed the shock into grief and anger. Ivy's funeral had drawn hundreds. Pink balloons had been released into the sky above the cemetery. Ryan had spoken briefly, describing his daughter as wild and wonderful and full of light. Diane had placed Ivy's favorite stuffed rabbit inside the coffin. Inside the courtroom, emotion gave way to structure. The prosecution's case was clear. Ivy had been subjected to sustained physical abuse at the hands of Aaron Blake, culminating in a fatal assault on the evening of July 16th or early hours of July 17th. Megan Rollins, while not alleged to have inflicted the fatal injury, had failed to protect her daughter despite multiple warning signs. Medical experts testified first. The pediatric neuroradiologist explained the CT and MRI findings. The subdural hemorrhage was extensive. There was evidence of both rotational acceleration-deceleration forces and blunt impact. The retinal findings were described as severe and multi-layered, a constellation of injuries highly specific for abusive head trauma. The defense attempted to argue that a fall downstairs could produce significant injury. Under cross-examination, however, the experts were consistent. While falls can cause harm, the totality of Ivy's injuries, including the number and distribution of bruises and the rib fractures, could not be explained by a single accidental event. A forensic pediatrician detailed the pattern of bruising. She noted that accidental bruises in toddlers typically occur over bony prominences, such as shins and foreheads. Ivy's bruises were located on soft tissue areas, including the inner thighs, upper arms, neck, and torso. Some bore the appearance of grip marks. "This is a child who has been handled with force," she told the jury. Digital forensic officers walked the court through Aaron's phone data. The timestamps were displayed on large screens, the search queries, the photographs, the video, the messages. When the 22-second video was played, the courtroom was silent. Several jurors visibly flinched. Megan wept openly. Aaron sat expressionless. The prosecution emphasized the delay in seeking help and the attempts to construct a false narrative. They argued that Aaron knew precisely what he had done and chose self-preservation over immediate medical intervention. Megan took the stand in her own defense. She admitted that Aaron had a temper. She acknowledged arguments, broken furniture, and episodes of drug use. She described feeling isolated during lockdown and fearful of being alone. She said he believed his explanations for Ivy's injuries because she wanted to believe them. "I never thought he would kill her," she said quietly. The prosecutor asked whether she had noticed the bruises accumulating. "Yes," she answered. "And you accepted explanations without independent verification?" She hesitated. "I trusted him." The Crown suggested that trust in the face of escalating harm was not reasonable, that a mother has a duty to act when her child is repeatedly injured. Aaron chose to testify as well. He denied ever intentionally harming Ivy. He maintained that she fell down the stairs and that the dog may have contributed. He claimed the bruises were typical of an active toddler. He stated that he recorded the video to show his mother how unwell Ivy was, not out of indifference. Under cross-examination, inconsistencies emerged. His description of the fall varied from earlier police interviews. He could not adequately explain the rib fractures or the patterned bruises. When asked why he searched online before calling for help, he said he panicked. The prosecutor's final question was direct. "You were alone with Ivy when she sustained a catastrophic head injury, were you not?" Aaron responded, "I didn't hurt her." After 6 weeks of evidence, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned after 3 days. Aaron Blake was found guilty of murder. Megan Rollins was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. At sentencing, the judge described the case as one of the most distressing he had presided over. He outlined the sustained nature of the abuse, the vulnerability of a 2-year-old child, and the calculated delay in seeking medical help. Aaron was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years. Turning to Megan, the judge acknowledged that she had not inflicted the fatal injuries. However, he emphasized her repeated failure to protect Ivy despite visible signs of harm and escalating violence in the home. "You placed your need for companionship above your daughter's safety," he said. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Following the trial, a multi-agency child practice review was conducted. The review examined the involvement of health visitors, general practitioners, and social services. It concluded that while professionals had engaged with the family appropriately based on available information, there had been missed opportunities to explore emerging risk factors more assertively, particularly the presence of a new partner during lockdown. Recommendations focused on improved information sharing, greater professional curiosity when unexplained injuries recur, and heightened vigilance during periods of social isolation. For Ryan and Diane, policy reforms were secondary.
they established a small charitable initiative in Ivy's name to support awareness of child abuse indicators and to provide practical assistance to single parents experiencing domestic violence. They spoke publicly about coercive control, about the speed with which new relationships can become dangerous, and about the importance of trusting instinct over reassurance. Aberwin gradually returned to routine, but Ivy's case remained a reference point in safeguarding training across the region. Her sisters were placed with extended family members. Their identities were protected. Counseling and long-term support were arranged. In the end, the legal process assigned responsibility but could not restore what was lost. Ivy Rollins loved pink nail varnish and messy dancing in the living room. She insisted on climbing higher than she should and laughing louder than anyone expected. Those who knew her remember not the court transcripts or forensic reports, but the small, stubborn girl who refused to sit still. Her life lasted just under 3 years. Its impact endures far longer.